think like in future trends, like looking ahead, like right now, I personally kind of feel like the performance bagger, as much as that gets thrown around a lot, and some are more performance than others, that's kind of a trend right now that we're in, that I'm seeing. And what are your feelings about current trends? And because I mean, you're so involved in the custom bike world, and maybe some future trends that you see just emerging right now. What are those trends?
I think really, I mean, to say the first thing is horsepower never goes out of style, you know. So that's always been underlying. It's just now there's kind of more of a, you know, a moto aspect to performance stuff.
Performance bagger style
it'll be crazy performance bagger build. Yeah. So, you know, it'll be lighter, and for me the criteria of a performance bagger, because that word is completely overused now.
It is, for sure.
Is you know, it's got to be lighter, faster, and brakes and stop better.
Yeah.
And then if you don't do any of those, then it's not a performance bagger. It has to have all three of those things.
Yeah, I like that. They were one of the invited racers on the King. Is it the King of the Baggers?
Yeah. King of the Baggers, man.
King of the Baggers.
Yeah, so
big deal right now.
Ton of press, ton of publicity. A lot of guys covering it. The views, like on social media and things like that, were like off the charts compared to the rest of like the Moto America stuff.
Incredible.
And there's one of the most iconic views that have ever been seen.
Let's look and listen to the start.
And here we go. Who's going to grab that hole shot and coming up the...
Ben Bostrom with a good jump on that outside.
Looks like Frankie Garcia on the Roland Sands Indian Challenger grabs the first hole shot ever and up the inside. But Raj, what did he do? Came in a little hot.
Got in on the inside and just got in a little deep and couldn't hold the line.
It's completely unprecedented, and this was the first step forward, and it was a massive first step.
It was huge.
And these bikes were beating the 600 Super Sport speeds.
Yeah.
You know, our top speeds of 138 that they were going were in the top 10 of the Superbike class.
For a bike that started out at almost 800 pounds, to be able to lighten up that much and make that much performance and be ridden that way, like that's
I think it made a lot of people really look differently about the baggers and their perception of and the stuff that they were saying. You know, they're slow. There's no, you know, and then they see them and they're like, holy crap, these things are freaking flying down the straightaway 130 miles an hour.
As far as like the rules going into this, like we've kind of been talking behind the scenes, like, wow, this seems kind of like the Wild West. Like there's not a whole lot of like rules and stuff.
They sent some rules around a couple times and then changed them when everybody bitched. And there was supposed to be rules, but I'll be perfectly honest. This first year, since it was kind of more of an exhibition race, which turned out to be a very serious race. Yeah. If you watched it, it was completely a badass race.
Yeah, well, it was awesome.
Yeah, they didn't really enforce them too much.
Hayden Gillum on the Vansenheim Street Glide, number 79. Corey West on the Sly Fox Road Glide. Travis Wyman, folks, on a turbocharged Road Glide from Trask, and the battle starts to heat up. It looks like we have the 79 of Gillum trying to make a move and look at the breakaway right now.
Part of the newness of the sport is really cool because you see all these stories that are cool where you got, you know, guys that don't have the huge corporate money, you know, guys like you putting it together, making it work.
Man.
And, you know, once it gets really big and all the big money comes in there, you don't have these little stories about someone's girlfriend buying bars on OfferUp. So the fact that we're at kind of at the beginning of this whole movement, if you want to call it that, I think is very cool and kind of special too.
There were some people with certain organizations who were like, hey, we want to have professional pits. This isn't no swap meet and blah, blah, blah. And I want, you know, just, we got kind of treated bad at first, and then to see the evolution. But, you know, some of these crusties have been on the circuit forever, you know, that worked the events and stuff. And to watch them get won over was unbelievable. Next thing you know, they're our best buddies, buying us beers and shit. You know,
That's very interesting.
And you listen to some of the comments as the guys were coming out, and you hear some of the pit crews from the other teams behind me when I'm there, and they're like, I hope that thing doesn't leak oil all over the track and this and that. But at the end of the day, when they see those times, and they're like, I mean, really, a lot of guys came and said, man, I had no idea Harley could go that fast and handle that well.
He can't run it wide. He's going to use up all of that track that he can, and he's really good at backing that bike in. It may be big, but he's kind of freewheeling coming into some of those turns. Can he do the slingshot? There it is, going into the corkscrew. Wow.
The bagger is kind of that deal. Like you got to have bags. It's got to be heavy, and
it's a challenge.
It's an engineering challenge.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's going anywhere. Like Matt said, follow the money.
Yeah.
Like I said earlier, Moto America would be rather stupid to drop the ball on this.
Yeah.
Anybody involved would be rather stupid to drop the ball on this, whether it's the title sponsor, Moto America, anybody involved. I mean, you got to give the people what they want.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
You know?
There were definitely some that went, what? And I'm like, you want to go where with this? And I'm like, Laguna Seca. And I'm like, they
Crazy.
just couldn't see it. Now, it was funny. Some of the people that pushed back the hardest as we got closer were like, hey, maybe we made a mistake on this and we went in, so.
You guys are setting up shop on the racetrack. Like, what was the perception? Like, how were you guys accepted out there?
Perception, this was a new breed to Moto America.
Yeah.
So they didn't want it to look like a swap meet.
Right.
That's what they were worried about. They thought we're going to come out there, oil the track, parts are going to be flying off these bikes.
Yeah.
First practice, everyone was kind of watching, trying to see what happened. Then they saw what these bikes were really doing. Next thing you know, it was the most popular event of the whole weekend. So
How comfortable are baggers to ride, period?
Yeah.
They are a very comfortable bike. They're like a couch on wheels, right?
Yep.
But when you can make that also a performance-inspired vehicle and actually go out and frickin' slam some gears and haul some ass and then still have your stuff in your frickin' your saddlebags, right? And then get there and pull off on this frickin' badass machine that you were just so comfortable on, but actually out-cornered half these frickin' cars.
Yeah.
Why the hell not?
Yeah,
I think you just hit it, Justin.
Don't keep your mind closed, man.
We wanted to go do this in the first place. Let's go race a bagger. It was really one of the more exciting moments in my career, was just that little, hey, we think we want to go do this. What should we do? We wanted to come out swinging and show that that performance group within Harley-Davidson was capable of building the best bike in the world.
Points-paying race for the Moto America season for Mission King of the Baggers. All eyes on the 33 of Kyle Wyman, starting from pole position. Off to a great start on his Harley-Davidson Screaming Eagle Road Glide.
We have 3 Harley-Davidsons now in front with the factory bike leading the way over the 2 Vance and Hines bike, then Travis Wyman.
King of the Baggers, it's turned into a really interesting and competitive series.
There's been a massive shift in King of the Baggers. It's essentially turned into all-out war.
An arms race to develop the most sophisticated bagger race bike possible.
They're closing in on superbike top speeds and times. It's insane.
Kyle is the guy we're all going after. He's got the factory seat.
This is your job and you're expected to win. That's a welcoming type of pressure.
Hey, what's up guys? Matt here, coming to you from Laidlaw's Harley-Davidson. So I'm going to be doing a review on the 2024 model year CVO Road Glide ST, a bike that when I first heard about back in January when the new models were released, that I was super excited. Obviously excited enough to go ahead and get one myself and sell my 2018 Street Glide Special. So here we are, my brand new bike, and I wanted to put some mileage on it before I did a full review. That's why I'm kind of late in the game doing a full review on this bike, because I wanted to buy one myself. I knew I was going to get one, and so I wanted to get one myself, put a few hundred miles on it, which is what I've done at this point, to really give you guys, the best review possible. And I had the opportunity to ride it out at the Las Vegas Speedway and put it on a track so you could really, put it to the test the suspension at high speeds, run it up to high RPM, run it up to high speeds and everything out on the track, and really give it a good feel for what the bike is intended to be ridden at. First off, I always want to say too that I'm excited about this bike because now for, I'd say probably the last 7-8 years, we've seen the trends in performance baggers just steadily increase. And a lot of the custom work that we've done on baggers, like when people buy road glides or street glides, we've kind of seen an evolution now where people have now shifted to spending their money on performance parts. And it's kind of interesting to see over the years as we've seen the evolution of what people are spending their money on in terms of customization on road glides and street glides. For a long time, it was the big wheel baggers, right? We saw the big 23-inch wheels, the big stereos, the crazy paint, airbags, things like that, a lot of cosmetic stuff. And then, you know, we saw some of that stuff trickle down into like the street glides and the road glides. You know, the Road Glide Custom that came out in 2010, Harley-Davidson took note of some of these features and, you know, big stretch bags and things like that. And now, you know, we're seeing a big shift where a lot of things are, you know, performance driven. Bigger motors, a better suspension, taller shocks, better clearance, moto style T-bars, high risers. And now, back in 2020, we saw Harley-Davidson enter in the Moto America King of the Baggers race. And now they're actually racing these baggers, which I think if you said that 20 years ago, no one would believe you that would ever happen. But now Harley-Davidson has what I feel like is the first true factory performance bagger that any major motorcycle manufacturer has come out with. And I personally think that there's been bikes that have had like inspiration around performance, like the Road Glide ST, the Street Glide ST. A couple people that have made comments on my page say like, oh, maybe the Indian Challenger was a performance bagger, factory performance bagger. But in my opinion, yeah, there's inspiration drawn from performance features, but I don't think there's ever been a bike where a major motorcycle manufacturer has looked at everything on the bike and been like, okay, how can we make this a true purpose-built performance bagger from the factory? And so I feel like the CVO Road Glide ST has done that. So let's start off first with the engine. So you've got 121 cubic inch Milwaukee-Eight. We saw 121 cubic inches from the factory last year when the 23 model year CVOs were first introduced. Of course, those have the variable valve timing. This is what they call the high output 121. So it puts out 145 foot-pounds of torque and 127 horsepower. Which is a really big bump, especially when you compare it to like the 117 that comes on the non-CVO Road Glide and Street Glide this year. So the 117 Road Glide and Street Glide, they do have the new heads. Those motors are retuned a little bit to give out a little bit more power. Those are putting out 105 horsepower, 130 foot-pounds of torque. So, you know, you've got quite a bit more power. You know, we're talking about 20% more horsepower in this bike. So it is a big bump. I get asked the question a lot. Okay, well, how does the 121 high output motor compare to the 121 variable valve timing that the non-ST CVOs have? And I've ridden them both. I got to ride the CVO, the 23 model year CVO Road Glide and Street Glide in Sturgis last year. And they're pretty close, to be honest, guys. I think the biggest difference is, and here's where you got to try to figure out what your personal use case is. With the variable valve timing, you just have to be less active in the gear management when you're riding the bike. So what I mean by that is, you know, you're just gonna have access to more power and like maybe the lower end of the RPM spectrum when you're riding the non-ST version of the CVO. And so it's a little bit more practical power for the guy that just kind of wants to cruise and ride in a true cruiser fashion. They're still beasts. Those variable valve timing 121 bikes are tons of power. Again, they're very close, but I feel like the power on this bike, I think it's like 12 horsepower more on the high output motor. You're gonna be able to access that power and utilize that power if you're more active with downshifting and really staying in that sweet spot for this bike. That being said, I took this bike up Ortega Highway a couple of days ago, and you know, even at 3,000 RPM, which I feel like is on the lower end of where you're gonna really get the meat of the power, you grab a hand, throw a throttle, and this thing pulls immediately. It's like blowback in the seat power. And so the power's not hard to access. That being said, I did find myself, you know, playing with the gears more, and that's kind of what I wanted in my next bike. I wanted a bike that liked to run at a higher RPM where I could be a little bit more aggressive with my gear selection and just be a little bit more aggressive on the throttle and running it at a higher RPM. That's kind of what I wanted from a motorcycle. But if that's not like your cup of tea, that's not what you're going for in a motorcycle, and you just kind of want to have that, I don't want to say lazy man, but just a little bit more, you can kind of be in whatever gear you want type of power to a certain extent, then I would say the non-ST CVOs would probably be a little bit better for you. I would recommend you guys watch my review on the Road Glide and Street Glide this model year to get kind of all the basic information you need to know about the new body style. We do have a new body style this year on the Road Glide and Street Glide, but I think the bulk of this video I'm going to talk about is what makes the CVO Road Glide ST special above and beyond the regular Road Glide and regular Street Glide. And by the way, they did not make a CVO Street Glide ST this year, so you can only get the ST version of the CVO in the Road Glide, which is one of the big factors that made me go to a Road Glide now. I've been a Street Glide guy for about 10 years now. I've owned 2 different Street Glides. And I thought I was Street Glide guy for life, but as soon as I saw this ST and it kind of fit a lot of the criteria that I wanted in a new motorcycle, I went Road Glide, and honestly I'm happy with it. I've always loved the Road Glide, but you know, Street Glides has always kind of been what I identify with the most in a Harley-Davidson fairing. As far as the 121 output motor, so you're running a different cam, you do not have the variable valve timing, so it does like to run a little bit higher RPM. When you compare it to the variable valve timing 121, you've got about 12 more horsepower. When you compare those 2 motors, they're pretty close. I will say when you compare the 117, the non-CVO Road Glide, this just feel of power in the throttle and the seat of your pants, it's a big, big difference. And we're only talking about 4 cubic inches more from a 117 to a 121, but you have a lot more power. Just practical, on the street, using the power, you can definitely feel that this thing just has a lot more get up and go right out of the hole, and even at top end, you're just gonna feel like this has a lot more power. And I can't always say that about like a bigger motor. Like when you compare like the 114 to a 117, yeah, there's a difference there. It's noticeable, but it's not like super dramatic. I will say the CVO power is there's a dramatic difference when you compare it to the non-CVO, which is how I think it should be. You know, years prior to this, when the CVOs had a 117, the same as like a Lowrider S or the same as a Lowrider ST or the Road Glide ST or the Street Glide ST, you had basically the same 117 motor on the CVO as you did on some of these ST motorcycles. And I felt like that was just kind of wrong, because part of the reason why people buy CVOs is to get more power, right? And so I feel like we're now back to a place where Harley-Davidson should be, and that is when you spend the money and you want top of the line, you're gonna get noticeably more power. And so I can say with confidence that now with these 121s, you're getting a lot more power from the factory. And can you get more power if you buy like the 135 crate engine or, you know, the 131 top end rebuild kit? Yes, you can get even more power if you do those kits. Do I personally feel like I would need more power than what comes on this factory 121? No, I feel like this 121 is as much power as I'm ever gonna need. Need is kind of a subjective word though. You know, a lot of guys, they want the biggest, they want the best, and they always wanna go faster. And so if that's what you want, you can always get that 135 crate motor, that 131 top end build, and get more power than even the CVO. Of course, that doesn't come from the factory. You need to incur the labor expense and the cost of, you know, that rebuild kit and everything. But from the factory, this bike has the most power offered outside of like the Pan America. Pan America, we're still talking about 150 horsepower, but that's a completely different water-cooled animal, which kind of takes me to my next thing, the character of this bike. You still retain the character of a traditional Harley-Davidson air-cooled V-twin. This does have a supplemental water cooling system on it with the new heads where you've got a little bit larger radiator now. This bike still reacts, and the character is such that it still feels like an air-cooled motor, which I think is extremely important for Harley-Davidson, because when people get on a Harley, they want the sound of an air-cooled motor and they want the feeling of torque and the setup of an under-square big piston performance motor. And so this definitely still gives you that power delivery and that character. So let's talk real quick about what makes this CVO Road Glide ST special. So first of all, you have some unique items that Harley-Davidson is introducing on this bike from the factory, which I think is always cool when they do that with CVOs. So you've got some carbon fiber pieces on here, the front fender, you've got the dash piece, and then you've got the rear seat cowl. That's all carbon fiber on this bike, which are parts that they offer out of the parts and accessory catalog, which again, I think that's a really cool touch. They have the flat out bar, which is basically your engine guard this year, which is like a straight out flat out bar that I've seen a lot of the aftermarket companies over the years that are performance driven, offer that style of engine guard. And so Harley-Davidson's taken note there. That is, however, one of the parts that I'll probably replace because, like I said in my last video, I'm a touring guy. I'm not a racetrack guy. I wanted a race bike and then put my touches on it and then use it for a touring application. And so some of the stuff just isn't gonna really fit what I plan on doing with the bike. And so the engine guard is one of those things. The other thing is the seat. The seat's cool, the seat's great, it looks good. It's got a lot of really cool detail in it, especially with that carbon fiber rear seat cowl back there, but I'm gonna change the seat as well. At 6 foot 6 inches, I'm just too tall for the stock factory saddle here, and so I'm gonna get a seat that moves me back a little bit for comfort reasons. I'm gonna change out the flat out bar personally, just because I wanna have highway pegs on my bike so I can stretch my legs out when I'm going down the open highway, and so flat out bar is not gonna work out for me. Some of the other things I really do like about this bike that I think were really cool details that Harley-Davidson included in here. You've got wave rotors on the front, dual disc brakes, of course, Brembos, but the wave rotor style is really cool. I think on paper it helps dissipate heat a little bit, but how much that's gonna come into play, I'm not really sure exactly, but it's a cool style nonetheless. You've got the inverted forks on this bike, which are unique to the CVO as well. A little bit more of a racing application there. You got radial mount Brembo brakes on the front as well. And so front end is pretty much well equipped for riding it hard, riding on the track, hitting those canyons real aggressively, which is probably the application that I'll be using more than the track, of course. The track, I probably will never step foot on a track ever again on my bike. But the canyons are super fun. As I was riding Ortega Highway, I gotta say, I was expecting the bike to be good, but a lot of times you do all these things, you have this equipment on the motorcycle and you're like, okay, it looks good, but is it really gonna perform in real world situations? And I gotta say it did. And on the track, it's one thing, because the track I was on, it was perfectly flat. You're not hitting bumps on the turns or anything. But going up a windy canyon road, when you're hitting bumps, you're climbing, you're going on inclines and declines and things like that. The suspension has to react in different ways. And I gotta say, I was impressed. I was very impressed. And so what I would say to you guys, I'm gonna jump to the conclusion early here. If you're looking for a true performance-driven bagger from the factory, this bike is going to give it to you, and it's going to produce results. It's not going to be just for looks. This bike actually backs up what it has on it. If you're someone that's going to buy a Road Glide or a Street Glide and put a bunch of money into it anyways in aftermarket parts, you might want to look at this for $43,000 and get a lot of that stuff straight from the factory, backed by the motor company, done by their team with their warranty backing, as opposed to spending probably more money on a Road Glide in suspension, brakes, and everything else, motor work, to get it up to this point. You're looking at base price of $26,000 for a Road Glide, this at $43,000, so we're looking at what, 17,000 bucks. You can go through $17,000 in a hurry when you're doing motor work and suspension and upgraded brakes and all that stuff. So to get that from the factory, I think this is a really good value. Honestly, and I don't think I've ever said this on my channel before, I think this is too good of a value, to be perfectly honest with you. I'm surprised that the bike came in at $43,000 MSRP. I think Harley probably could have priced this higher because I do think it is that good of a value. Of course, you do leave some stuff on the table when you compare this to the non-ST version of the CVO. I've gone through this in previous videos, but I'll mention it again since this is my full review. You don't get heated grips on this bike. You don't get remote locking saddlebags on this bike. You don't get the headset with this motorcycle. You don't get the Home Link garage door opener on this motorcycle. You don't get a cover with this motorcycle either. So there's some of these like little extras that a lot of us CVO buyers, have become accustomed to over the years that you don't get with this motorcycle. And I say that, but this is actually my first CVO. Yeah, so there's just some of these little things, these creature comforts, little extra goodies that you don't get, that historically you've always gotten on most every CVO that you don't get with the CVO Road Glide ST. So I don't know if that's Harley-Davidson taking away some of that stuff that maybe isn't as important to the racing application type of rider as it is like your normal everyday touring commuter type of rider. But those are a couple things that you should take into account. My recommendation is if you are someone that isn't necessarily going to be riding really hard, and you're not necessarily someone that wants to take advantage of that peak best little extra power that you get, that extra 10% of power, if you're someone that doesn't really value that, then you might want to just get the non-ST CVOs. That might be better for you, and especially since you're getting all those couple extra things like the locking bags and things like that that you can never really get on this bike. At least there's not a kit that's offered by Harley-Davidson that you can get on this motorcycle. So let's talk about a little bit more things on this bike that make it unique. So you got a really big, heavy breather intake. That's part of how Harley-Davidson squeezes out a little bit more power on this. You have the switchback collection on this bike, which is cool because it's a new collection of Harley-Davidson's P&A offering that comes stock on this bike. So that's grips, foot controls. The floorboards are a smaller floorboard on this bike, which personally I don't like. I understand why they did it because it's a little bit smaller, a little bit sportier, but I personally, again, for my touring application I'm going to use this bike for, I don't care for these floorboards. That's going to be one of the things I changed. I'm getting the larger version of the switchback floorboards. You got to change out front brackets on the floorboard. The paint, I think someone could argue that, hey, you're not really buying fancy CVO paint that a lot of people are used to on CVO Harley-Davidsons. It's kind of simplistic. That being said, I really like it. You've got the Screaming Eagle going across the front of the bike. We are celebrating the 25th anniversary of the CVO motorcycles this year. The first one being in 1999 with the FXRs, which is an iconic bike. If you guys are interested in seeing kind of what I feel like are the best CVOs over the year, check out my link in the upper right-hand corner. I'll give you guys kind of a little history on what I feel like are the best CVOs Harley-Davidson's ever created. However, I might need to redo that video because I feel like this bike now is definitely it's definitely in the top 10 best CVOs Harley-Davidson has made, in my opinion. So you've got a unique wheel on this bike as well, which I think is really cool. I don't think they have an official name for it, but the wheel design on this motorcycle is unique to just the CVO Road Glide ST, which I think is really cool. They've got like a little T-bar, taller riser on this bike from the factory as well. Harley-Davidson corporate went as high as they could and still be legal. It's actually, the ergonomics of it are really, really good. That is, however, going to be one of those things that I change. I am going to go to a taller riser. I'm going to get a seat that sets me back further. A little bit taller riser kicks me back because my knees are a little bit high on the tank at my height. But if you're about 6 feet, I feel like that's kind of the sweet spot for most of the touring chassis motorcycles, where it's going to fit you really, really well. And so if you're 6 feet or shorter, you probably won't need to change that seat. The seat looks really good. Well, let's talk suspension real quick. So Harley-Davidson used Showa for their front and rear shocks on this bike. I admit, when I first took the bike off the lot and I had John, our technician, set it up for my weight, he set the preload on it, and you can set the compression and rebound on this motorcycle as well. I felt like rolling out of here was a little bit stiff. Again, I'm someone that goes in a straight line a lot out on the highway at 65 miles an hour plus. And at first I was like, okay, you know what? For my use case, this suspension's a little bit stiff. Maybe I need to loosen up the compression, make it a little bit softer for my use. And then I rode it on the canyons, went up Ortega Highway, and I was like, okay, actually, this is just racing suspension. This feels perfect. Going up the canyons and everything, going through the turns, the wheels kept that contact patch with the ground, hugging the turns, in and out of the turns. The power was great. And I think that's the main point that I want to make here, guys. This bike was designed to race with. It is a true racing bagger. And so the suspension is such that, hey, this is set up for racing application. And so I'll probably keep it the same, to be honest, because when I do hit the canyons or whatever, I want it to be dialed the way it is. But I'll probably go to a little bit softer seats, and hopefully that takes the edge out of the stiffness when I'm cruising down the freeway for a long time. Or maybe I'll just dial back the compression and the rebound settings a little bit to give it a little bit more floaty ride if I'm going on like a 1,000-mile trip or something like that. I don't know, but the fact of the matter is it's nice to have that option. I have fully adjustable front forks now. which isn't offered on any other motorcycle in Harley-Davidson's touring chassis lineup. You know, things like the Pan America have electronically adjustable suspension, which is awesome, but to be able to adjust all that stuff from the front forks, compression, rebounds, you've got the remote reservoir shocks in the tail end here. Again, you can adjust your preload, your compression, your rebound, all that stuff right here on the remote reservoirs in the back. The stereo is upgraded as well from the factory, so you got Harley-Davidson's Rockford Fosgate 6.5-inch speakers. I believe they're the Stage 2 speakers right from the factory. You've also got Harley-Davidson's upgraded 500-watt amp on here as well. So you do have the nicer audio system on here. Of course, you do not have the saddlebag speakers, which is one of the things that I should have mentioned earlier that is kind of a compromise you have to make if you go with the CVO Road Glide ST. You don't have the 4-speaker audio that you get on the non-ST version. So if you're an audio guy, maybe one more thing to consider if you're kind of shopping between this bike and the non-ST motorcycle. For me personally, I can take them or leave them. Out on the highway, I don't really listen to my stereo that much. Around town, I turn it on and listen to it, but the stereo system just has never really been a high priority for me personally. I usually wear earplugs now when I'm riding a bike, just to kind of get rid of all that wind noise. My hearing is kind of starting to go a little bit, and so I want to preserve my hearing as best I can, and so yeah, stereo out on the open road has never really been a big priority for me, so I had no problem compromising that a little bit. You have Harley-Davidson's new infotainment system on here, their big Skyline 12.3. It's the same infotainment system really as the non-CVO versions of the bike, and there's a couple things like there's the splash screen and everything that's there to help remind you that you did buy a CVO. But other than that, you do have the embedded navigation on the CVO, which is kind of nice. You don't have to spend the $350 to get the embedded navigation, which is a feature that I might use once in a while on the fly, but I think if I'm really navigating a trip or something like that, I'm probably just going to use Apple CarPlay. As I was riding around the other day on my bike, I noticed it was kind of annoying that the Apple CarPlay error kept popping up because I didn't have a headset on, and so I got to link my headset up to the bike to use my Apple CarPlay. You got to have the microphone enabled to use Apple CarPlay on these new infotainment systems, but so far the new infotainment system is rad. You've got all digital gauges. Another thing that I think is very notable is they cut about 25 pounds off the CVO Road Glide ST when compared to the non-ST version. So this bike is running lighter and more powerful. Yeah, one more performance-driven attribute about this bike that I think is very notable is they did try to cut weight on this bike quite a bit. A lot of that is in the steering head, the triple tree, which is similar to what they did on the non-CVO bikes as well. So they did cut weight on this bike. So you do have ride modes like you do the other Road Glide and Street Glides that came out, the Generation 3 motorcycles. However, there is one kind of really cool feature that is on the CVO Road Glide ST that isn't available on any other bike, and that is track mode. Track mode is where you have a lot of those electronic intervention tools like ABS and traction control. They're pretty much dialed back to minimal intervention. Things like wheel slip and really hitting the brakes and the electronics letting you maybe break the wheel loose a little bit in some circumstances is present when compared to the other side of the spectrum, which would be like rain mode, where those intervention electronic aids are dialed to their maximum basically. And so track mode is going to give you full access to the power, the throttle, and also the parameters are dialed to Kyle Wyman's specs that he uses on his bagger as he's racing in the King of the Baggers. So it's kind of cool that Kyle Wyman worked directly with the factory and put his stamp of approval on the parameters that are set on track mode on this bike. Personally, I found myself riding pretty much exclusively in track mode. A lot of times on my other bikes like my Pan America with ride modes, I ride a lot with road mode. And on this bike, I just feel like to really get the full benefit of that 121, you're gonna be wanting to ride in track mode. And so I ride in track mode a lot. Throttle progressivity is quick, it's snappy. Your RPM the needle just climbs a lot quicker than when compared to like road mode or especially rain mode. I tried sport mode as well, and honestly I couldn't really feel too much between sport mode and track mode. I'm sure I could probably feel it if I was riding around a track in the same turns and with the same throttle a lot. The other thing that track mode allows you to do is take the bike up to a max speed of 120 miles per hour, which is roughly 10 miles an hour faster than the non-ST version of this bike as well. So a little bit more top end as well, which I think is really cool. And I think at the end of the day too, style is important. When I first laid eyes upon this bike, I was like, wow, that looks amazing. I just think everything from the shocks to the solo seat with the carbon fiber bits on there, to the real aggressive heavy breather intake on there, to the flat out bar. You've also got this DLC diamond-like carbon coating on the front forks there, on the slider portion of the front fork there, which I think is a really cool touch as well, because a lot of the guys in the performance world, they're doing things like anodization and different coatings on their forks. So to see that from the factory, I think is a really cool detail. It's very in tune with kind of this performance bagger scene that Harley-Davidson did. The look on these new Road Glides is just a really aggressive look with the lighting and everything. And so the style was immediately one of the things that attracted me to the bike. I was between the white one and the black one. I ended up getting the black one. You guys, my subscribers, actually picked the color for me, so thank you for everybody that voted. I'm super happy with the black, by the way. They're both beautiful colors. I will say too, you know, the fairing in terms of like wind deflection, I get pretty much no body wind at all. This bike ships from the factory with a very short, low profile windshield, which I will be changing out. I'll probably grab a Clockworks or something like that. Harley-Davidson offers taller windshields as well that look really clean. I really like this new floating windshield design that they've got there, where it basically bolts into windshield mounting system. Yes, I'm super glad that Harley-Davidson didn't do an electronic windshield, which is something that people argue with me all the time. Electronic windshields on motorcycles, I think, are garbage. You put a motor up there, which adds more weight. The shape of the windshield is kind of funky, and then you have to design a fairing around a windshield going inside the fairing, which gives you an ugly bloated, you know, fairing like the Challenger has. And so I don't believe in electronic windshields. To pay $250 and set the windshield where you want it once. You know, I just find myself never adjusting windshields after the fact. Once I set it once, I never really touch it again. Not everybody thinks like I do, and so I get it if you like adjustable windshields, but I'm glad Harley-Davidson did not do it on this bike. That being said, yeah, I will go to a taller windshield again, because when I'm out on the road, I want more headwind deflection. That pretty much sums it up, guys. Appreciate you guys watching. Super stoked on my bike. I'm going to be doing a build series. Some of those items that I mentioned, I'm going to be doing to my bike, things like bars, seats, windshield, foot controls. I'm going to be adding a tour pack to this thing as well. I may be doing exhaust in the future, but that's one of those things that from the factory, you've got a titanium muffler, which is one of the things that I probably should have mentioned earlier. So you're cutting weight with the titanium muffler. It looks awesome, and you've got a carbon fiber tip on there as well, which I think looks great. And so anything I replace that with, I don't think is going to look as good. It'll be louder, which is one of those things that, you know, are one of the reasons why I might change it in the future, is to make this thing really sound good and sound really mean. But in terms of just the overall look and the aesthetics of it, I may just keep the stock exhaust on here because of how good it looks. And once again, I'm not really looking to make my bike extremely loud, because when you're logging miles out on the road traveling, which is the core purpose why I buy motorcycles, for traveling, I don't want to have that loud exhaust, you know, for thousands of miles. So I may just leave that the same. But overall, yeah, super pumped for the bike. Again, I'll repeat myself. If you're someone that's going to be spending a lot of money on a performance bagger setup anyways, the CVO Road Glide ST from the factory, I think, is kind of where you should put your money. You're getting a really good value out of all the stuff that comes on this bike. You have the big motor, you have the awesome suspension, you have the look, you have the awesome brakes. Braking, suspension, and motor, those are the three things that you really need to, you know, be maximizing to, I think, really earn the title of performance bagger. And Harley-Davidson has definitely done that with the CVO Road Glide ST. Thanks a lot for watching, guys. We'll see you on the next one. If you're looking for a new or used Harley-Davidson in Southern California, make sure you check us out here at Laidlaw's Harley-Davidson. We'll see you guys on the next one. Later.